6 videos. That is how many times Savannah Guthrie stood in front of a camera, not as a journalist, but as a daughter, and begged a stranger to return her mother. 6 videos, each one more desperate than the last, each one ending with the same 3 words: bring her home. An FBI profiler watched all 6 of them, and when she was done, she did not ask about the masked man on the doorbell camera. She did not ask about the ransom notes. She asked one question about Annie: subscribe and turn on notifications. Murder Mystery File takes you exactly where investigators are looking. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She lives alone in the Catalina foothills, a wealthy enclave in the hills north of Tucson, Arizona. She has lived there for more than 50 years. She goes to church every week. She knows her neighbors. She is mentally sharp, independent, and according to her family, fully aware of everything happening around her. She also has limited mobility, requires daily medication for a chronic condition, and her 3 adult children do not live with her. To the right person, that combination, wealth, visibility, isolation, dependency, is not a vulnerability. It is a blueprint. Savannah Guthrie is one of the most recognized faces on American television. Every morning, millions of people watch her on NBC's Today Show. Her mother's face, her mother's name, her mother's address in a quiet Arizona suburb, none of that is a secret. And none of that is an accident in a case like this. When investigators say this crime was targeted, they are not speaking loosely. They mean someone studied this family, someone learned their routines, someone chose Nancy Guthrie specifically, and then waited. Here is what you need to know about the night of January 31st. Nancy spent the evening at her daughter Annie's house. Dinner, family, an ordinary Saturday night. Around 9:50 in the evening, Annie's husband, Tommaso Cioni, drove Nancy home. He watched her walk inside. He left. That was the last time anyone who came forward saw Nancy Guthrie alive. Not Savannah, not Cameron, Annie and Tommaso. And one more person, someone who, investigators now believe, may have already been watching the house that night. When Annie's phone rang the next morning, it was not her mother calling. It was a friend from church. Nancy had not shown up for the Sunday service live stream. She never missed it. Annie, stay with that detail. We will come back to it. On the morning of February 1st, relatives went to Nancy's home around 11 a.m. They searched the house. They searched the property. They found her phone. They found her wallet. They found her keys. Everything that a woman would take with her if she chose to leave was still exactly where she left it. Everything except Nancy. Around noon, they called 911. By the time deputies arrived and began processing the residence, it was already clear this was not a missing persons case. It was a crime scene. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos would later say, publicly, that investigators believe Nancy was taken from her home against her will, possibly in the middle of the night. He was not speculating. He had already seen the evidence. At 2:28 in the morning, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker stopped syncing with her Apple devices. That is not a conclusion. That is a timestamp. Whatever happened inside that house, whatever caused Nancy Guthrie to stop moving, to stop breathing, to stop existing as a trackable presence in the digital systems that monitor her health, it happened at 2:28 a.m. Investigators have that number. They have built an entire theory of the crime around that number, and they have not told the public what they think it means. The doorbell camera should have captured all of it. A Nest camera, mounted at Nancy's front door, should have recorded every second of that night. It did not because Nancy did not have an active cloud subscription. Without a subscription, the footage is not saved. The camera recorded motion. The software logged an alert. And then the data was gone, or so everyone thought. Engineers at Google, which owns Nest, spent days working backward through residual data in back-end systems. What they recovered changed the entire case. A man, a ski mask, gloves, a gun holster visible on his hip, a 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack, the kind sold exclusively at Walmart. He walks up to Nancy's front door. He reaches toward the camera with one gloved hand and tries to cover the lens. Then he steps back, picks up a piece of shrubbery, and uses it to block the view entirely. He knows exactly where the camera is. He has planned for it. FBI Director Kash Patel posted the footage publicly on February 10th. 6 photographs and 3 video clips. The man in those images has not been identified. But here is the detail that stopped investigators cold. One of those photographs was not taken on the night Nancy disappeared. It was taken on a different day. This man had been to her house before. Now the question was no longer who did this. The question was, how long had he been watching, and what did he already know? The answer to that question led investigators somewhere they did not expect. Not to a stranger. Not to a random opportunist who drove through a wealthy neighborhood and picked a house. It led them to a search warrant. And the address on that warrant was not Nancy Guthrie's house. It was her daughter Annie's. Within days of Nancy's disappearance, law enforcement moved on Annie Guthrie and her husband, Tommaso Cioni. First, they impounded the couple's car. They removed security cameras from the property. Then they came back. The second search was documented by journalists on the scene. Law enforcement vehicles surrounding the area, investigators inside the home for hours, agents photographing multiple rooms, and, according to reporters present, a specific examination of the property's septic tank. One agent was seen carrying a silver briefcase into the house. Search warrants are not issued without probable cause. A judge reviewed the evidence and signed off. Twice. And then there is this. When Derek Colella, a 42-year-old man from California, was charged with sending a hoax ransom message in connection with this case, the message was not addressed to Savannah. It was not addressed to Cameron. It was sent directly to Annie Guthrie and her husband. Savannah Guthrie is the famous one. Savannah Guthrie is the public face of this family. If you wanted to exploit this case for money, you would contact Savannah. Unless you had any reason to believe Annie was the relevant contact. Watch the 6 videos Savannah posted. Really watch them. In the first video, Savannah, Annie, and Cameron sit together. Savannah speaks. Annie and Cameron do not say a single word. In the videos that follow, Savannah continues to be the only voice. Annie is present. Annie is visible. Annie says nothing. That could be grief. That could be personality. Or it could be exactly what an FBI profiler notices when she watches the same footage 6 times and then asks one question. Investigators have since confirmed that Annie and her family have been ruled out as suspects. But ruling someone out as a suspect is not the same as ruling out what they know. Like this video to help Murder Mystery File keep digging into cases like this one. The question was never whether Annie did something. The question, the one that kept coming back, the one the profiler kept circling, was what Annie might have said. To whom and when? Because if this crime was targeted, if someone studied Nancy Guthrie's routines closely enough to know exactly which night she would be alone, exactly when she would return home, exactly where her camera was mounted, and how to disable it, then somewhere in Annie's life, in her conversations, in her connections, is the thread that leads back to the man in the ski mask. But in the meantime, FBI investigators were building something else entirely, and what they found in the evidence would take this case somewhere no one had expected it to go. Evidence in a case like this does not arrive all at once. It accumulates, it layers. And in the Nancy Guthrie investigation, each layer raised a question the previous one could not answer. Start with what the FBI recovered from the cameras. On February 10th, Director Kash Patel confirmed that agents had worked with Google engineers to pull residual data from Nancy's Nest camera system. The footage showed the suspected kidnapper at her front door in the early morning hours of February 1st. But the recovery effort did not stop there. In the weeks that followed, investigators pulled additional images from 3 separate cameras on the property. One at the front door, one over the driveway, one in the backyard. According to ABC News, these cameras were also trained on the swimming pool and side yard. The images recovered were thumbnails, not full video. They showed people in the yard area in the days and weeks before the abduction. Nothing appeared suspicious. And critically, the cameras captured nothing on the night Nancy disappeared. The night itself remains unrecorded. The physical evidence told a different story. Nancy's blood was found on the front porch. DNA confirmed it was hers. A propped open door, a disconnected camera, and somewhere on the property, in a location investigators have not disclosed, additional DNA that does not belong to Nancy or to anyone in close contact with her. Sheriff Nanos confirmed that detail in an interview with NBC News and said investigators remain hopeful it will lead somewhere. About 2 miles from the house, a glove was found. It appeared to visually match the gloves worn by the suspected kidnapper in the doorbell footage. Investigators submitted it to CODIS, the national DNA database that holds profiles for more than 19 million known offenders. No match. The man in the ski mask is not in the system. Investigators are now looking at genetic genealogy, the same technique that identified the Golden State Killer, that caught Brian Kohberger, that cracked the Gilgo Beach murders. It is slower, it is more complex, and it works. The scale of this investigation is difficult to overstate. By late February, the FBI had collected and was actively reviewing up to 10,000 hours of surveillance video footage from cameras in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood, from businesses, from residences, from every angle investigators could find. The FBI's Phoenix office reported receiving more than 13,000 tips. Billboards featuring Nancy's photograph and the FBI tip line went up in Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, and California. In early March, FBI agents returned to Nancy's neighborhood with new questions specifically about former neighbors who had moved out of the area shortly before her disappearance, and about construction workers who had been working on a house nearby. A resident told News Nation that an agent asked her friend to provide the names and contact information for every contractor who had worked on her property. Former FBI agent Steve Moore said this kind of return visit is not a sign of investigators going backward. It is a sign they are moving forward, and they know exactly which direction they are heading. One person was detained for questioning. On February 10th, law enforcement pulled over a man during a traffic stop in Rio Rico, Arizona, about an hour south of Tucson, close to the border with Mexico. Investigators executed a search warrant on his home and his vehicle. His name is Carlos Palazuelos. He told Telemundo he had never heard of Nancy Guthrie and had nothing to do with her disappearance. He was released hours later. No charges were filed. But the choice of Rio Rico is not incidental. It is a data point. Investigators do not drive an hour south of Tucson on a hunch. Something in the evidence pointed them there. What that was has not been made public. Comment below what you think investigators were looking for, and subscribe so you do not miss the next update. The ransom notes arrived at 3 separate newsrooms within days of Nancy's disappearance. Each outlet received what appeared to be a demand from the person holding her. The notes referenced cryptocurrency. They set deadlines, and buried inside at least one of them was a detail that had never been made public: the specific location of Nancy Guthrie's Apple Watch. Investigators had not released that information. It was not in any press conference. It was not in any leak. The only way to know where that watch was is to have been inside that house. The FBI acknowledged the notes existed. They forwarded copies to investigators, and then they said something that reframed everything. They could not confirm the notes were authentic. In a case built on questions, that answer created the largest one yet. If the notes were real, someone was holding Nancy and choosing silence over money. If they were not real, someone with intimate knowledge of the crime scene was running a separate operation entirely. Either way, Nancy Guthrie had not come home. Both deadlines passed. The first at 5 in the afternoon on February 9th. The second shortly after. No contact, no proof of life, no response of any kind. Savannah Guthrie had said on camera, "We will pay." The family had said publicly they received the message, they understood, they were ready. The kidnappers, if there were kidnappers, went silent. Retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffin-Daffer, speaking to Newsweek, offered her read on what that silence meant. Her theory was not about negotiation tactics or cryptocurrency logistics. Her theory was that no proof of life ever came because there was no life left to prove. She said she believed something had gone wrong early, that the plan had collapsed before the ransom could ever be collected, and that whoever took Nancy Guthrie was now holding a secret far more dangerous than a kidnapping. Sheriff Nanos did not say that. What he said, in an interview with NBC News, was more carefully worded and in some ways more alarming. He said investigators believe they have known the motive since the beginning. He said that belief has not weakened. He said the crime was targeted. And then he said something that cut through every reassurance he had offered in the weeks prior. Do not think for a minute that because this happened to the Guthrie family, you are safe. He was not speaking abstractly. He was telling the public that the person responsible for taking an 84-year-old woman from her home in the middle of the night had the capacity and potentially the intent to do it again. A Pima County sheriff does not say that at a press conference without a reason. Former FBI agents who spoke publicly in the weeks that followed did not agree on much, but they agreed on this. The silence from whoever sent those notes was the most important data point in the case. Retired hostage negotiator Chip Massey told NBC News that without voice contact, without the ability to hear the other person and have them hear him, most of his training became irrelevant. Written communication alone, he said, can be used to deceive investigators as easily as it can be used to negotiate. And retired agent Harry Trombitas told Yahoo News that Ransom as a motive was looking less and less likely with each passing week. Too many ways to get caught, he said. Too much exposure for too little result. The motive, he suggested, might be something investigators had not yet named publicly: revenge, anger, or something else entirely. Something the public had not considered. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you are here when this case breaks. Now here's where the investigation took a turn that most coverage of this case missed entirely. Because while the public was focused on the ransom notes, on the deadlines, on the silence, investigators were doing something methodical and specific. They were going back to the beginning. Not to Nancy's house. Not to the doorbell camera footage. They were going back to the weeks before February 1st. To the visits. To the patterns. To whoever had been watching. The FBI's behavioral analysis in a targeted abduction does not start with the crime. It starts with the access. How did the perpetrator know which house to approach? How did they know the layout? How did they know the camera positions? How did they know exactly when to move? Answering those questions requires understanding one thing above everything else: the information chain. Who knew enough about Nancy Guthrie's life to make this plan possible? And when investigators placed that question next to the timeline of January 31st, the dinner, the drive home, the specific window between 9:50 at night and 2:28 in the morning, one relationship keeps coming into focus. Not because of guilt, because of proximity, because of knowledge, because of what a person can reveal without ever meaning to. That is the question Dr. Ann Burgess carried into every viewing of those 6 videos. Not what Savannah was saying, not what the family wanted the kidnapper to hear, but what the body language, the silence, the structure of those appeals revealed about the internal dynamics of this family, and what those dynamics might tell a trained profiler about the architecture of the crime itself. Comment below what you noticed watching those videos. The answer to Peak 1 has been sitting in the open this entire time. The architecture of a targeted crime has a foundation. You do not choose a victim at random and then happen to know which camera to disable, which night to move, and which window between a family dinner and a church service gives you the longest uninterrupted access. That kind of precision requires information. Specific, personal, operational information. And in the Nancy Guthrie case, the FBI profiler's question about Annie was never about suspicion. It was about source. Where did the information come from? Who had it? And how did it travel from the people who loved Nancy to the person who took her? Dr. Ann Burgess, one of the founding architects of the FBI's criminal profiling program, appeared on Surviving the Survivor to walk through her analytical framework for this case. Her starting point was a distinction that sounds simple, but carries enormous investigative weight. Is this person missing, or is this person taken? The answer to that question determines the entire profile of the offender. A stranger abduction for ransom requires advanced planning, target selection, surveillance, logistics. It requires the offender to have identified Nancy Guthrie not just as a person, but as an asset, something worth the risk, worth the preparation, worth the exposure. And for Nancy to have been selected as that asset, someone had to have communicated her value, her connection to a famous daughter, her home in a wealthy neighborhood, her daily routine, her medical vulnerability, her predictable Saturday evenings at her daughter's house. The second search of Annie's home lasted for hours. Investigators photographed multiple rooms. They examined the septic system. They left with a silver briefcase. The following day, the Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed the search had taken place, confirmed it was part of the ongoing investigation, and offered no further explanation. What was in the briefcase has never been disclosed. What they photographed in those rooms has never been disclosed. But here is what is not in dispute. Search warrants require a judge to review the evidence and sign off on probable cause. That happened twice at Annie's address. Twice. A judge agreed that there was sufficient reason to look. That is not a fishing expedition. That is a trail. And the trail, according to multiple former federal agents who spoke on record, leads back to the same question investigators have been asking since the earliest days of the case. This was a targeted crime. The offender knew things they should not have known. Somewhere between the world Nancy Guthrie inhabited and the man who appeared at her door in the early hours of February 1st, there is a connection. It may be direct. It may be a degree removed. It may live in a conversation Annie had weeks earlier, without any awareness of what she was saying or who was listening. But it exists, and investigators believe they are getting closer to it. If you have any information, even something that feels small, call 1-800-CALLFBI. The reward totals more than $1 million and can be paid anonymously. The last known movement on Nancy Guthrie's medical device was at 2:28 in the morning. After that, silence. The investigation that followed has been, by any measure, one of the largest domestic missing persons operations in recent American history. Tens of thousands of tips processed, hundreds of hours of agent time in the field, a coordination between local, state, and federal agencies that expanded week by week rather than contracting. And as of the recording of this video, no arrest, no body, no confirmed sighting. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. What investigators do have is this: confirmed DNA at the scene that does not match any known offender in a database of 19 million profiles, a physical lead being processed through genetic genealogy techniques that have solved cases the justice system had given up on, a geographic focus that extended south toward the border in ways that have not been explained publicly, a behavioral profile of an offender who prepared thoroughly and then, by all available evidence, panicked. Former agents who spoke on the record described a crime that appeared coordinated at the outset and then unraveled. The ransom notes went unanswered. The deadlines passed. The proof of life never came. If the goal was money, the execution failed completely. And that failure, investigators believe, is itself a form of evidence. Nancy's family has not stopped. Savannah Guthrie, who walked away from one of the most visible jobs in American broadcasting to search for her mother, shared a video in late February asking anyone, anywhere, to be the person who brings her home. Her sister Annie used a phrase in one of the family's appeals that has stayed with people who followed this case closely. "We are blowing on the embers of hope." That is not the language of someone who has accepted an outcome. That is the language of someone still fighting against one. The reward stands. The tip lines are open. The investigation continues. And the question that has not been answered, the one Sheriff Nanos has been carrying since day one, the one he says he believes the answer to, but will not speak aloud, is still waiting. There are things this case teaches us that go beyond the search for one woman in Arizona. The first is practical. Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera did not save footage because she did not have an active cloud subscription. The device recorded motion. It logged an alert, and the footage disappeared. Google engineers spent days recovering what little remained. If you have a security camera in your home, check right now whether your footage is being saved to a cloud backup. A camera that records locally, and only locally, is a camera that can be silenced by anyone who knows how to pull a device off a wall. The subscription is not a luxury. In a case like this one, it is the difference between a suspect and a ghost. The second lesson is structural. What this case teaches us about targeted crime in the United States is that the most dangerous offenders are not the most impulsive ones. They are the ones who do their research. The man who appeared at Nancy Guthrie's door had been there before. He knew the camera positions. He knew the timing. He had, in the assessment of multiple federal investigators, conducted surveillance over an extended period before moving. Targeted crime of this nature requires an information source. It requires someone, somewhere, to have communicated enough detail, intentionally or not, to make the plan viable. Understanding that chain of information is not just how investigators solve cases. It is how communities protect themselves before a case ever begins. As of today, Nancy Guthrie has been missing for more than 45 days. The investigation has not slowed. The FBI is still in the neighborhood. Genetic genealogy is still running. And somewhere, an investigator is sitting with a piece of evidence they have not yet been able to connect to a name. Sheriff Nanos said he has known the motive since the beginning. He has not said what happens when motive finally meets identity. Murder Mystery File will be here when it does. If this case matters to you, subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you know anything at all, 1-800-CALLFBI. The tip is anonymous. The reward is real. Bring her home.